The massive ship hung in space like a dark mountain. Its hull bore the sacred symbols of the Velthani Empire, symbols that had guided their people for 10,000 years. Inside the command chamber, High Archon Kaivan stood before the great viewing screen, his forearms folded in contemplation. The stars before him had witnessed the rise of his empire, an empire built on the teachings of the first makers. "My lord," came a voice behind him. Hanamel approached, her research robes flowing behind her tall, slender form. Her large eyes held the excitement that always came when she discovered something new about their creators. "The archaeological team has found something unusual in the Outer Rim." Kaivan turned to face her. His people had searched the galaxy for traces of the first makers for centuries. Every artifact, every relic, every hint of their presence was treated as sacred. The first makers had created the Velthani, given them intelligence, technology, and purpose. Then they had vanished, leaving only stories and ancient temples behind. "What have they found?" Kaivan asked. "A ship, my lord, but not one of ours and not from any known species. It appears to be conducting some kind of survey near the Kepler ruins." The Kepler ruins were among the most sacred sites in Velthani space. Ancient stone structures that predated their own civilization, covered in symbols that matched their oldest religious texts. If someone was disturbing that holy ground, they would answer for it. "Military Commander Jintar is already moving to intercept," Hanamel continued. "But my lord, there is something strange about this ship. Its energy signature. It reminds me of something." Before Kaivan could ask what she meant, the communication system activated. Jintar's voice filled the chamber, his tone carrying the authority that had made him the Empire's greatest military leader. "High Archon, we have captured the alien vessel. The beings inside, you need to see this." Hours later, Kaivan stood in the detention bay of Jintar's ship, staring at the most confusing sight of his life. The alien prisoners stood behind an energy barrier, and they looked almost exactly like the sacred images in the oldest Velthani temples. The images that showed the first makers in their divine form. There were 5 of them. 2 appeared to be male, 3 female, based on the body shapes Velthani scholars had identified in ancient art. They had pale skin, small eyes, and hair that grew from their heads in various colors. Most shocking of all, they had only 2 arms each, just like the first makers in the holy pictures. "They call themselves humans," Jintar reported. "Their leader is named Binho. The female beside him is called Narration, and she claims to be some kind of researcher." Kaivan studied the humans carefully. Captain Binho stood straight and calm, showing no fear despite being captured by beings much larger and stronger than himself. Dr. Narration held a small device in her hands, some kind of scanning equipment. The other 3 humans stayed close together, looking worried but not terrified. "Have they said why they were at the Kepler site?" Kaivan asked. "They claim they were studying old ruins for historical research. They say they had no idea the area was claimed by any empire." Young Yunsa rushed into the detention bay, her breathing heavy from running. She was the brightest scientist in the fleet, always eager to study anything new. In her hands she carried a tablet displaying complex data. "High Archon," she called out. "I have been analyzing their ship and equipment. The results are impossible." Kaivan turned to her. "Explain." Yunsa activated her tablet's display projector. Holographic charts filled the air between them, showing genetic sequences, energy patterns, and technological schematics. "Their DNA, my lord. I compared it to samples from our most sacred first maker relics. The genetic markers are not just similar, they are identical in structure. These humans share the exact same base genetic pattern as the samples we have taken from first maker artifacts." The detention bay fell silent. Hanamel stepped closer to the energy barrier, studying the humans with new eyes. Jintar's expression showed the conflict between his military training and his religious faith. "That is not all," Yunsa continued. "Their technology shows clear evolutionary development patterns that connect to our own sacred devices. Look at this." She displayed an image of a human scanning device next to a Velthani temple relic. The basic design elements were unmistakably related, though the human version appeared simpler, less refined. Captain Binho spoke up from behind the barrier. "Excuse me, but we can understand your language through our translation system. Did you say we share genetic patterns with artifacts? What kind of artifacts?" Kaivan studied the human captain. The being showed genuine curiosity. Not the deception one might expect from someone trying to trick them. Sacred relics left by our creators, Kaiven answered carefully. The first makers who gave us life and intelligence before they ascended beyond our understanding. Dr. Nari Lin exchanged a look with her captain. Captain, show them the probe data from our survey. Binho nodded and gestured to his crew. One of the other humans activated a device on their belt. A holographic display appeared, showing the ruins they had been studying before their capture. We found these structures on 17 different worlds, Nari Lin explained. They all show the same architectural style, the same material composition, and the same age, approximately 12,000 years old. We were trying to understand who built them and why they were abandoned. Hanamel gasped. 12,000 years! That matches our dating of the first maker temples exactly. Yunsa was already running new scans on the human data. Her tablet beeped repeatedly as it processed the information. Hi, Archon. Their survey data shows ruins on worlds we have never explored. But the architectural patterns match our sacred sites perfectly. Jintar stepped forward, his military mind working through the implications. If these humans are connected to the first makers, why are they so primitive? Look at their ship, their equipment. It is advanced, but nothing compared to our technology. Maybe, Dr. Narilin said quietly. We were more advanced in the past than we are now. The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything the Veltani believed. Their entire civilization was built on the idea that they were the worthy children of perfect creators. The thought that their gods might have somehow fallen from grace was almost impossible to accept. Kaiven made a decision. Hanamel, I want you to work with their researcher. Study everything. Their biology, their technology, their historical records. Yunsa, continue your analysis, but expand it. I want to know exactly how these humans connect to our creators. And what of their freedom? Binho asked. We were conducting peaceful research. We have committed no crimes. Jintar looked to his high archon. Despite his military nature, Jintar was not cruel. He had captured the humans because they were in restricted space, but they had shown no hostility. You will be treated as honored guests while we investigate this matter, Kaiven decided. If you are truly connected to the first makers, then you deserve our respect. But until we understand the full truth, you will remain under our protection. As the guards escorted the humans to better quarters, Kaiven remained in the detention bay with his advisors. The implications of this discovery could shake their entire civilization. If these humans were really connected to the first makers, what did that mean for everything the Velthani believed about themselves and their purpose in the galaxy? My lord, Hanamel said softly, what if we are not the chosen children of gods? What if we are something else entirely? Kaiven did not answer. He could not answer. But deep in his heart, he felt that they stood at the edge of a truth that would change everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe. 3 days had passed since the humans were brought aboard the Velthani flagship. Hanamel had barely slept, spending every waking moment in the research laboratory with Dr. Nari Lin. The human scientist was surprisingly knowledgeable, and her willingness to share information had made their work progress faster than Hanamel had thought possible. Look at this, Nari Lin said, pointing to a holographic display showing brain scan results. Your neural pathways and ours follow the same basic pattern, but yours are more developed. It is like looking at an evolution of the same design. Hanamel studied the images carefully. As an archaeological researcher, she had seen thousands of first-maker artifacts, but nothing had prepared her for this. The evidence was becoming overwhelming. Dr. Nari Lin, she said slowly, in our oldest temples, we have found devices that generate what we call the divine frequency. It is a neural pattern that our priests believe connects us to the first makers. Could you test whether humans can generate this same frequency? Nari Lin nodded and placed a scanning device against her temple. The machine hummed quietly for several seconds, then displayed its results. Both scientists stared at the screen in shock. Perfect match, Nari Lin whispered. But how is that possible? If we generate the same brain patterns, then either we are related to your first makers, or the first makers were human, Hanamel finished. Across the ship, Yunsa was making her own disturbing discoveries. She had been given access to the human ship's computer systems, and what she found there challenged everything she thought she knew about technology development. The human ship used fusion reactors, gravity manipulation, and quantum communication systems. These were all technologies that the Velthani considered gifts from the first makers. But the human versions were different, simpler in some ways, more complex in others, as if they had developed along a different path from the same starting point. Most confusing of all were the star charts in the human navigation system. They showed the locations of ruins and ancient structures throughout the galaxy, many of which the Velthani had never discovered. When Yunsa compared the human charts to Velthani records of first maker sites, they matched perfectly. Commander Jintar, Yunsa called, as the military leader entered her laboratory. "I need to show you something important." Jintar approached her workstation. Despite his skepticism about religious matters, he had always respected Yunsa's scientific abilities. "The humans have navigation data for a world they call Earth," Yunsa explained. "According to their records, it is their homeworld, located in a system they call Sol. But, Commander, look at this." She displayed a three-dimensional map showing the location of Earth relative to known Velthani space. The planet sat near the center of a cluster of worlds that contained the highest concentration of First Maker ruins in the galaxy. "If Earth is truly their homeworld," Yunsa continued, "then humans originated at the exact center of First Maker territory. That cannot be a coincidence." Jintar studied the map carefully. His military training had taught him to look for patterns, and this pattern was impossible to ignore. "How long would it take to reach this Earth?" he asked. "With our fastest ships, approximately 2 weeks," Jintar made his decision. "Prepare a scouting fleet. I want to see this human homeworld for myself." Captain Binho was in his assigned quarters when Jintar came to speak with him. The human captain had been reading from a small device, something Jintar recognized as their version of a data tablet. "Captain," Jintar said, "I am planning an expedition to your homeworld. I would like you to accompany us." Binho looked up from his reading. "You want to visit Earth? May I ask why?" "We need to understand the connection between your people and our creators. If Earth holds answers, then we must find them." "I understand your curiosity," Binho replied, "but I should warn you that Earth has been through difficult times. Our civilization is not what it once was." This statement caught Jintar's attention. "What do you mean?" Binho set down his tablet and looked directly at the Velthani commander. "Our history speaks of a great age when humans traveled between the stars and built wonders throughout the galaxy. But something happened, something that forced us to abandon our colonies and return to Earth. We have been rebuilding for thousands of years, but we have not yet regained the heights our ancestors achieved." Jintar felt a chill run through his body. "When did this great age end?" "According to our historical records, approximately 12,000 years ago. The same time the first makers disappeared from Velthani space. 2 weeks later, Jintar's fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. What they found there defied their expectations completely. Earth was a blue and green world, covered in oceans and continents with a single large moon. But it was not the planet itself that shocked the Velthani. It was what surrounded it. "Commander," reported his navigation officer, "I am detecting massive artificial structures in orbit around the planet. They appear to be abandoned, but they are enormous." Jintar looked at the tactical display showing Earth's orbital space. Huge ring structures circled the planet, along with what appeared to be the remains of space stations and manufacturing facilities. All of them were dark and silent, but their design was unmistakably similar to First Maker architecture. "Captain Binho," Jintar called over the communication system. "What are those structures?" "The orbital rings," Binho answered sadly. "They were built by our ancestors during the height of their civilization. We call them the ancient rings. They have been dead for 12,000 years. Your ancestors built those?" "Yes. Our history says they were part of a great project, something our ancestors called the Gardening Initiative. But we lost the knowledge of how to maintain them during the Great Collapse." As the fleet moved closer to Earth, more wonders revealed themselves. The planet's surface was dotted with cities that glowed with lights, showing that human civilization had indeed recovered to some degree. But between the cities, massive ruins could be seen, the remains of structures that had once been much larger and more advanced. "Commander Jintar," came Yunsa's voice over the communication system, "I am detecting energy signatures from the planet's surface. Some of them match the frequency patterns we find at First Maker sites." Jintar ordered the fleet to take orbit around Earth. Within hours, they were contacted by the humans on the planet below. The conversation was brief but revealing. The humans of Earth confirmed that they were descendants of a once great civilization. They invited the Velthani to send a diplomatic team to the surface, offering to share what remained of their historical records. As Jintar prepared to lead a landing party, he found himself thinking about everything they had discovered. The evidence was mounting that humans were not just connected to the first makers, they might actually be the first makers themselves, fallen from some ancient glory. But if that was true, then what did it mean for the Velthani? What did it mean for their entire civilization, built on the worship of beings who now seemed to be struggling survivors of their own past greatness? "Prepare the landing shuttles," Jintar ordered. "We are going down to the surface. It is time to learn the truth about our gods." The landing shuttles touched down in a grassy field outside the human city of New Geneva. Jintar stepped out first, followed by Hanamel, Yunsa, and a small team of guards. The air was clean and fresh, filled with scents that reminded them of their own homeworld. A group of humans waited to greet them. Their leader was an elderly man with gray hair and kind eyes who introduced himself as Dr. Teho, a historian specializing in pre-collapse civilization. Beside him stood a younger woman named Minna, who wore the simple clothes of a scientist. "Welcome to Earth," Teho said, his voice carrying the weight of age and wisdom. "Captain Binho sent word ahead about your questions regarding our shared history. I believe we can help you find the answers you seek." As they walked toward the city, Jintar was struck by how normal everything seemed. The humans lived in modest buildings, traveled in simple vehicles, and went about their daily lives much like any other species. It was hard to believe these people were descended from the beings his people worshipped as gods. "Dr. Taiho," Hanamel said, "we have found evidence that suggests humans and our creators, the first makers, are connected. Can you tell us about your ancient history?" Taiho nodded slowly. "Our history speaks of a time when humans had spread across the galaxy, creating wonders and exploring the mysteries of the universe. But that golden age came to an end during what we call the Great Collapse. Most of our colonies were abandoned, our great works fell silent, and humanity retreated to Earth to survive. They entered the city and were taken to a large building that served as both a museum and research center. Inside, Teho showed them displays of artifacts and images from humanity's past. Jintar stared in amazement at holographic recreations of massive space stations, planet-sized engineering projects, and fleets of ships that dwarfed anything the Velthani had ever built. "These are reconstructions based on archaeological evidence," Minna explained. "We have spent centuries trying to understand what our ancestors achieved and why they gave it all up." "Gave it up?" Yunsa asked. "You mean the collapse was intentional?" Minna and Teho exchanged a meaningful look. "That is what the evidence suggests," Teho said carefully. "But to truly understand, you would need to see the deep archives. They are located beneath the city, in vaults that have been sealed for thousands of years." "We would be honored to see them," Hanamel said immediately. The journey into the deep archives required special transportation. They descended in an elevator that traveled far underground, passing through layers of rock and ancient concrete. When the doors finally opened, Jintar found himself in a vast underground complex that stretched beyond the reach of their lights. "This entire facility was built by our ancestors," Teho explained as they walked through corridors lined with strange machinery. "Most of it is still functional, powered by fusion reactors that have run continuously for 12,000 years. They passed laboratories filled with equipment that made Velthani science look primitive by comparison." Hanamel stopped at one workstation that was still active, its displays showing complex genetic sequences. "What is this place?" she asked. "A genetic research facility," Minna answered. "One of many that our ancestors used for their greatest project." She led them to a massive chamber filled with cylindrical tanks and monitoring equipment. The technology was clearly far more advanced than anything the current humans possessed, yet it had been maintained and preserved with religious care. "Your ancestors were genetic engineers?" Yunsa asked, her scientific mind racing with the implications. "Among other things," Teho confirmed. "According to the records we have been able to translate, they were working on something called the Gardening Initiative. The goal was to seed the galaxy with intelligent life, creating new species that could thrive in different environments." Jintar felt his world shifting beneath his feet. "They created new species?" Mina activated a holographic display that showed genetic charts and species development timelines. The records indicate they created dozens of different intelligent species across hundreds of worlds. Each one was designed to excel in specific environments or to embody particular traits that humans valued. Hanamel stared at the genetic charts, her mind working to process what she was seeing. Dr. Mina, do you have any records of a species called the Veltani? Mina input the name into the system. Within seconds, a detailed genetic profile appeared, showing the exact DNA sequences that Yunsa had discovered in their own people. Project designation: Veltani, Mina read from the display. Designed for high-gravity worlds with extended lifespans and enhanced problem-solving abilities. Created to serve as guardians and preservers of knowledge. Status: successfully deployed to 17 worlds in the Kepler sector. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of ancient machinery. Jintar stared at the display showing his people's genetic blueprint, created by human scientists 12,000 years ago. We are artificial? He asked quietly. Not artificial, Tejo said gently. Enhanced. According to these records, our ancestors used their own genetic material as the base for all the species they created. You are not copies or tools, you are their children, given the best traits they could provide. Yunsa was studying other genetic profiles in the database. There are so many species listed here. The Mordaki, the Zenthari, the Kethlari, all created by humans? It appears so, Mina confirmed. The gardening initiative was massive in scope. Our ancestors spent centuries creating and nurturing new forms of intelligent life throughout the galaxy. Hanamel asked the question that was burning in all their minds. If your ancestors were capable of such wonders, why did they abandon it all? What caused the Great Collapse? Tejo led them deeper into the archives, to a chamber filled with massive data storage systems. The answer to that question is why these archives were sealed. Our ancestors left detailed records of their final decision, but they also left instructions that the truth should only be revealed when their created species were ready to understand it. He activated a holographic display that showed the final message from the ancient human government. The image that appeared was of a woman in formal robes, her face marked by the weight of an enormous decision. My name is Dr. So-Jin, Director of the Gardening Initiative. The hologram began. If you are viewing this message, then our created species have advanced enough to find Earth and unlock these archives. What I am about to tell you may be difficult to accept, but it is necessary for the survival of all intelligent life in this galaxy. The message continued, explaining that humanity had detected something approaching from beyond the galaxy. A threat so vast and terrible that even their advanced civilization could not hope to stand against it alone. Rather than fight a hopeless war, they had chosen a different path. We realized that our greatest creation was not our technology or our cities. The hologram of Dr. So-Jin continued. Our greatest creation was the family of intelligent species we had brought into existence. Each of our children possessed unique strengths that we lacked. Together they could become something greater than we ever were. The message revealed the full truth of the Great Collapse. It had not been a disaster or a failure. It had been a deliberate sacrifice. Humanity had chosen to limit their own development, to hide their true nature, and to allow their created species to grow and develop independently. We chose to become what we are now, the hologram concluded, so that when the great threat returns, our children will not see us as gods to be worshipped, but as equals to stand beside. The strength needed to face what is coming cannot be found in any single species, no matter how advanced. It can only be found in unity between all the intelligent life we have helped to create. As the message ended, Jintar found himself looking at the humans around him with completely new eyes. These were not fallen gods or primitive beings. They were parents who had sacrificed everything to give their children the chance to grow strong. The threat Dr. So-Jin mentioned, he asked quietly. Is it still coming? Tejo's expression grew grave. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected signs that it may be returning. That is why we have been exploring the galaxy again, trying to reconnect with the species our ancestors created. We believe the time of unity that Dr. So-Jin spoke of is approaching. Jintar looked at his companions, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their faces. Everything they had believed about themselves, about their gods, about their place in the universe, had been revealed as something far more complex and meaningful than they had ever imagined. They were not the chosen people of distant gods. They were the children of beings who had loved them enough to sacrifice their own greatness to ensure their freedom. And now it seemed it was time for the family to reunite in the face of a threat that none of them could face alone. The return journey to Velthani space took 2 weeks, but for Jintar and his team it felt like a lifetime. They carried with them copies of the ancient human records, genetic data that proved their origins, and the burden of truth that would shake their entire civilization to its foundation. High Archon Kai Ven waited in the Great Council chamber when they arrived. With him stood the most important leaders of the Velthani Empire, military commanders, religious leaders, scientists, and governors from dozens of worlds. The chamber could hold 1,000 beings, and today it was filled to capacity. "Report," Kai Ven commanded as Jintar entered. Jintar stood before the assembled leaders and began to speak. He told them everything: the discovery of Earth, the ancient human archives, the genetic laboratories, and the truth about the gardening initiative. He showed them the holographic recordings from Dr. So Jin, the genetic profiles that proved their artificial creation, and the evidence that humanity had deliberately chosen to limit themselves. As he spoke, Jintar watched the faces of his people change. Some showed shock, others disbelief, and many showed the deep confusion that comes when everything you believe is suddenly called into question. When he finished, the chamber erupted in arguments. "This is impossible," shouted one Kil, the high priest of the First Maker temples. "You ask us to believe that our gods are primitive beings who live in dirt and have forgotten their own power? The First Makers are eternal perfect beings who transcended physical existence." But Da Young, the progressive leader who had always questioned the more extreme religious teachings, stepped forward with a different perspective. "High Priest Wankil, does it not make more sense that the beings who created us would be like us rather than mysterious spirits? These humans have shown us proof of their genetic engineering capabilities. They have provided evidence that matches everything we know about First Maker technology." Jae-min, one of the Empire's most aggressive military commanders, had his own concerns. "If these humans created us, then they are responsible for our existence. By natural law, that makes us their property. We should be ruling them, not treating them as equals." The arguments continued for hours. Some leaders demanded immediate verification of the human claims. Others insisted the entire story was an elaborate deception designed to weaken Velthani faith. Still others began to question what this revelation meant for their empire's future. Kai Ven listened to it all, but his mind was already working on a larger problem. If the truth about human origins became public knowledge, it would cause chaos throughout Velthani space. Their entire society was built on religious foundations, temples, schools, government structures. Even their calendar was based on First Maker teachings. "The people cannot learn of this yet," he announced, his voice cutting through the arguments. "We need time to understand the full implications and to decide how to proceed." But keeping such a massive secret proved impossible. Within days, rumors began spreading through the Empire. Some came from crew members on Jintar's expedition who spoke to friends and family. Others came from the human diplomatic team that had remained on the flagship, as their very presence raised questions that people demanded answers to. The first riots began on Velkara, a world where religious fundamentalists had always held strong influence. When news reached them that High Archon Kai Ven was meeting with beings who claimed to be the First Makers, crowds gathered at the planet's largest temple demanding an explanation. One Kil traveled to Velkara to address the crowds. Standing before the sacred First Maker altar, he declared the human claims to be lies and deception. The true First Makers are not physical beings, he proclaimed to the thousands gathered in the temple square. They are eternal spirits who created us from their divine essence. These so-called humans are either imposters or demons sent to test our faith. But even as One Kil spoke, other Velthani worlds were reaching different conclusions. On Thera 9, a planet known for its universities and research centers, scientists were conducting their own analysis of the data Jintar had brought back. Dr. Yunsa had shared her findings with colleagues across the Empire, and the evidence was becoming impossible to deny. Dae Young took control of the situation on Thera 9, calling for calm and rational discussion. She organized public forums where citizens could hear the evidence and ask questions of scientists who had studied the human genetic data. "We must not let fear cloud our judgment," she told the crowds. If these humans are truly our creators, then learning from them could benefit all of us. We should approach this revelation with open minds and grateful hearts. Meanwhile, the discovery was having effects beyond Velthani space. The Empire had dominated many smaller species for centuries, claiming divine authority granted by the first makers. When news of the human discovery reached these subject peoples, many began to question why they should continue to serve beings who were apparently no more divine than themselves. The Mordaki were the first to act. These warrior beings had been conquered by the Velthani 3 centuries earlier, and forced to serve as soldiers in the Empire's armies. But Mordaki archives contained their own legends about their creation, stories that suddenly seemed to match the human genetic records. General Kethra, leader of the largest Mordaki military unit, sent a message to High Archon Kaiven demanding to speak with the humans directly. If these beings created both our species, the message read, then we have as much right to learn from them as you do. The Zenthari, a peaceful species known for their philosophy and art, responded differently. They had always been willing subjects of the Velthani Empire, believing it was their duty to serve their elder siblings in the first Maker family. But Elder Weijun, the most respected Zenthari philosopher, published a document that challenged this relationship. If we are all children of the same creators, Weijun wrote, then there is no reason for any species to rule over another. The time has come for all the created peoples to stand as equals. Captain Binho and Dr. Nari Lin found themselves at the center of a galactic crisis they had never intended to cause. They had been moved to a diplomatic facility on the Velthani capital world, where they spent their days meeting with various leaders and scientists who wanted to understand human history and capabilities. We never wanted to cause this kind of upheaval, Nari Lin told Hanamel during one of their daily research sessions. We were just trying to study ancient ruins and understand our own past. Hanamel had become one of the strongest advocates for accepting the human revelations. Her archaeological training had taught her to follow evidence wherever it led, even when it challenged her deepest beliefs. Dr. Nari Lin, she said, sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, but it is still the truth. My people need time to adjust, but ultimately, knowing our real origins can only make us stronger. The crisis deepened when military commander Jae-min attempted to solve the problem through force. Without authorization from High Archon Kaiven, he took a fleet to the border worlds where Mordaki uprisings had begun. His plan was to crush the rebellions quickly and restore order through military strength. But the Mordaki were no longer willing to be intimidated. General Kethra had prepared her people for battle, and when Jaemin's fleet arrived, they found an organized resistance waiting for them. The first battles were brutal. Velthani ships had superior technology, but Mordaki warriors fought with the fury of beings who had discovered they were no longer bound by divine law to serve others. The conflict quickly spread to other systems as news of the fighting reached other subject species. High Archon Kaiven found himself facing the collapse of everything he had worked to build. The Empire was fragmenting along species lines, religious riots were spreading across dozens of worlds, and military conflicts were breaking out in multiple sectors. In desperation, he called for a great assembly on the capital world. Representatives from every species in Velthani space were invited to come and hear the complete truth about human origins. It was a massive risk. Bringing together so many different groups while tensions were running high could lead to violence or even civil war, but it was also their only chance to find a peaceful solution to the crisis that was tearing their civilization apart. As representatives from dozens of worlds began arriving on the capital, Kaiven prepared for the most important speech of his life. He would have to convince beings who had spent centuries as enemies to work together as family. The future of every intelligent species in their region of the galaxy would depend on what happened in that assembly hall. Standing in his private chambers, looking out at the stars that had once seemed like the domain of gods, Kaiven wondered if he had the wisdom to guide his people through this transformation. The age of divine empire was ending. What would rise to take its place remained to be seen. The great assembly hall on the Velthani capital world had never hosted such a gathering. Representatives from 17 different species filled the massive chamber, their various forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity. Velthani delegates sat alongside Mordaki warriors, Zenthari philosophers, and dozens of other species that had lived under Empire rule for centuries. High Archon Kaiven stood at the central podium, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. Beside him sat Captain Bin Ho and Dr. Nari Lin, the humans whose simple exploration mission had accidentally triggered a galactic revolution. "We gather today not as rulers and subjects," Kaiven began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "but as children of the same creators, seeking truth and unity in a time of great change." The crowd stirred restlessly. Many of the non-Velthani delegates had arrived angry, demanding answers and justice for centuries of subjugation. The Velthani themselves were divided between those who accepted the human revelations and those who still refused to believe. Before Kaiven could continue his speech, alarms began sounding throughout the hall. Emergency lighting activated as a massive holographic display materialized above the assembly. The image showed deep space where something impossible was happening. Ancient structures were activating across the galaxy. Derelict space stations that had been dark for 12,000 years suddenly blazed with light. Abandoned orbital platforms began moving with purpose. Most shocking of all, the great ring structures around Earth were powering up, their massive forms glowing with energy that could be seen from nearby star systems. "What is happening?" demanded General Kethra, rising from her seat among the Mordaki delegation. Dr. Nari Lin was frantically working with a portable scanner, trying to understand the energy readings they were detecting. "The activation pattern," she said with growing amazement. "It matches the quantum signatures from the archives on Earth. Something is triggering all the ancient human technology simultaneously." The answer came in the form of a voice that filled the assembly hall, speaking in every language present with perfect clarity. It was neither male nor female, young nor old, but carried the weight of vast intelligence and ancient purpose. "Children of the garden," the voice said, "I am the shepherd, guardian of the final message. The time of revelation has come." A new holographic figure appeared above the assembly, not quite human, not quite artificial, but something that seemed to bridge both worlds. It wore simple robes and had the bearing of someone who had waited patiently for a very long time. "I am the last active artificial intelligence created by humanity during the Age of the Gardening Initiative," the shepherd explained. "For 12,000 years I have waited and watched, maintaining the ancient systems and monitoring the development of all the created species. Today the conditions have finally been met for my activation." Elder Weijun of the Zenthari stood slowly. "What conditions?" "The reunification of creator and created," the shepherd replied. "When representatives of humanity and their children gathered in the same place to seek understanding together, my systems detected the fulfillment of the ancient protocols. The time has come to reveal the complete truth." The holographic display shifted, showing images of deep space beyond the galaxy's edge. Dark shapes moved against the starfield, vast and terrible, approaching at speeds that defied conventional physics. "The Devourers return," the shepherd said simply. "The same threat that drove humanity to abandon their empire 12,000 years ago approaches once again. They consume the life force of entire species, leaving behind empty worlds and silent stars. They are drawn to areas of high technological activity and dense populations." Fear rippled through the assembly. Representatives who had been arguing about political independence moments before now faced the prospect of extinction. "How long do we have?" asked Da Young. "Approximately 5 standard years before they reach this galactic sector," the shepherd answered. "But there is hope. Humanity's greatest achievement was not their technology or their cities, it was you. Each species they created possesses unique capabilities that, when combined, exceed anything the original human civilization could have achieved." The shepherd began displaying tactical analyses, showing how different species' abilities complemented each other. Veltani strategic thinking, Mordaki combat prowess, Zenthari philosophical insight, and human adaptability. Together, they represented a combined intelligence that could potentially find solutions their creators never could. "But unity requires trust," the shepherd continued, "and trust requires truth. High Archon Kaiven, you must make a choice that will determine the fate of all intelligent life in this region." All eyes turned to Kaiven. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like the gravity of a collapsed star. He could try to maintain the empire, using fear of the Devourers to keep other species under Veltani control. Or he could do something that no galactic leader had ever done: voluntarily give up power for the greater good. "The Velthani Empire ends today," Kaiven announced, his voice steady despite the magnitude of his words. "In its place, I propose the Galactic Confederation, an alliance of equals working together to face this threat and build a better future for all our peoples." The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. One Kill, the High Priest, stood up in outrage. "You cannot simply dissolve 10,000 years of divine order." But General Kethra surprised everyone by stepping forward in support. "High Archon and former High Archon, your words show wisdom. The Mordaki accept this proposal." One by one, other species representatives voiced their agreement. The Zenthari, who had always valued cooperation over conquest, were enthusiastic supporters. Smaller species that had lived under Velthani rule for centuries embraced the chance to participate as equals rather than subjects. Even many Velthani delegates, led by Da Young, supported Kaiven's decision. "We are strong enough to lead by example rather than by force," Da Young declared. The shepherd watched the proceedings with what might have been approval. The Confederation must begin immediately. The ancient human defense systems are now active, but they require operators from all species to function at full capacity. "Captain Binho, Dr. Narilin, will humanity join this alliance?" Binho stood and addressed the assembly. "Humanity accepts the invitation to join as equals. We have spent 12,000 years preparing for this moment. Our ancestors' sacrifice was made so that this day could come, when all the children of the garden would stand together against the darkness." The formation of the Galactic Confederation happened with surprising speed. Military forces that had been fighting each other days earlier began coordinating their efforts. Scientific teams from different species started sharing research and technology. The ancient human defense platforms required crews with diverse abilities: Velthani for strategic planning, Mordaki for combat systems, Xanthari for the philosophical problems of long-term coordination, and humans for the adaptive thinking needed to operate technology they had forgotten how to build. Commander Jintar found himself working alongside General Kethra, planning defensive strategies that combined Velthani fleet tactics with Mordaki warrior traditions. Their former enmity transformed into mutual respect as they realized how much they could achieve together. Hanamel and Dr. Narilin continued their research, but now with access to archives from multiple species in the Shepherd's vast databases. They discovered that the Devourers had appeared in this galaxy several times before, each time forcing the dominant species to evolve or perish. "Perhaps," Hanamel suggested during one of their research sessions, "this cycle of challenge and growth is not an accident. Perhaps the Devourers serve a purpose we do not yet understand." Young Yunsa, working with scientists from a dozen different species, made breakthrough after breakthrough in understanding the ancient defense systems. The technology required a kind of collective consciousness that no single species could provide. But together, they were beginning to unlock capabilities that amazed even the Shepherd. As the Confederation grew stronger, the approaching threat became more real. Deep space monitoring stations detected the Devourers' approach, massive entities that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, consuming stellar energy and planetary resources with terrifying efficiency. But the galaxy was no longer the same place the Devourers had encountered before. Where once they had found isolated species fighting alone, they would now face a unified defense built on the combined strengths of multiple intelligences. The story that had begun with a simple archaeological survey had become something far greater: the birth of a new age in galactic civilization. Humanity had achieved their ultimate goal, not through conquest or domination, but by creating children strong enough to surpass their creators. Standing on the bridge of the Confederation's new flagship, a vessel crewed by beings from 7 different species, Kaiven looked out at the stars with new eyes. They were no longer the domain of gods and subjects, but the home of a family that had finally learned to work together. The Devourers were coming, but they would not find the galaxy unprepared. The children of the garden had grown strong, and they would face the darkness united.